On Sunday, July the 2nd, 1666, a fire broke out in Thomas Farriner's bakery at the corner of Pudding Street and Mark Lane in London. Within 5 days, it had spread to more than 436 acres, destroying over 1,300 houses and other buildings and leaving tens of thousands homeless. This is the story of the Great Fire of London. When the fire began, no one really paid much attention to it. It was a hot summer night. People were out celebrating, and a small fire was nothing unusual. It wasn't until they realized that the wind was pushing the flames directly toward a large amount of tinder-dry material that people began to get worried. By midnight, the fire had spread to several buildings, and the baker, Thomas, realizing what a mess he had made, fled the city with his family. The alarm was raised, and soon enough, firefighters were racing through the streets, trying to put out the blaze. At first, it seemed like things were going well. The firefighters were able to stop the fire from spreading south toward the River Thames, but their luck ran out when they tried to cross the river. The fire jumped from house to house so quickly that people barely had time to flee for safety. Whole families were wiped out as they slept. Those who did escape often lost everything in the fire. Their homes were burned to the ground and their possessions were destroyed. They became known as the P-Recknin, or the Burnt Ones. Most of them lived in absolute poverty, and many died from disease and starvation. To make matters worse, people blamed each other for the disaster. Many said that Thomas Farnell deliberately set the fire so he could collect insurance money on his bakery. Others blamed the refugees from the plague, saying that they were too afraid to leave their quarantined homes and let the fire spread. Still, others blamed King Charles II, saying that he had done it to get back at the citizens for not giving him more money. None of these people were actually responsible for the fire. It just started when an ember flew out of Thomas Farriner's oven and set some dried-out building materials on fire. It would take 5 days for the fire to run its course. After it was all over, London was in ruins. 1,300 houses and other buildings had been destroyed, and the damage was estimated to be worth £10 million in today's money. This is equivalent to the loss of about 2% of England's entire national wealth. Of London's 100,000 or so residents, at least 10% were dead, and tens of thousands more were homeless. Most of those who survived had lost at least some of their possessions to the fire. People who had evacuated the city gradually trickled back in. But because there weren't enough houses for everyone, most of them ended up living in tents or sheds. Many of these people eventually moved to the suburbs, which were much safer from fire and also offered better working conditions. London's population declined by nearly half. But believe it or not, the Great Fire was a blessing in disguise. Not only did it help to end London's plague epidemic, but it also led to the construction of new hospitals, schools, and other public buildings that helped to improve the lives of ordinary people. So how exactly did this happen? How can a disaster be a good thing? Let's find out. So after the fire, London needed to be rebuilt. Most people wanted the city to be rebuilt as it was before, but some people used the opportunity to demand changes. These people believed that London had gotten too crowded and dirty during the 1600s, and that the city needed to be modernized if it was going to survive. One of these people was John Evelyn, who wrote a book called A Discourse of the Necessity and Advantages of a New London Bridge. In it, he explained why London needed to be rebuilt and how the government could do it. He said that the old buildings in London were too close together and that the streets were too narrow. This made it easy for fires to spread and made the city unsanitary. Also, he said, London needed a better system of public works, including better hospitals, schools, and other public buildings. Finally, he said that London needed to be more orderly and that the citizens needed to be more disciplined. If they could do all these things, then London would be a much better place to live. Evelyn's ideas were not popular at first, but over time, they started to win people over. In fact, they won over so many people that the government decided to hold a contest to see who had the best ideas for rebuilding the city. Evelyn's plan was one of 3 finalists, but it didn't win. Instead, The government chose a plan by a man named Robert Hooke. Hooke's plan was similar to Evelyn's in many ways. He also wanted to create a more orderly city with wider streets and better public buildings. However, he was even more radical than Evelyn. He wanted to turn London into a grid of straight streets and right angles. This would have looked very modern, but it was never done. The people of London didn't like the idea of getting rid of their old winding streets, which reminded them of their heritage. Still, Hooke's plan had a big impact on London. His detailed drawings of the ideal city inspired architects and planners for centuries to come. Even today, many of London's streets are laid out according to his plan. For example, the famous Parliament Street and Whitehall are both part of Hooke's plan for a new London. In addition to designing the layout of the city, Hooke also designed many of its buildings, including the famous Monument to the Fire of London, which stands in Pudding Street where the fire began. In addition to being a disaster, the Great Fire was also a wake-up call. It showed the people of London how vulnerable they were to disaster, and it convinced them that they needed to work together to protect their city. From then on, the people of London took steps to prevent another disaster like this from happening again. They created a new fire department, and they also passed laws that made it illegal to build too close to other buildings. These laws stayed in effect for centuries, and they prevented London from burning down again. The Great Fire of London is still one of the most important events in the city's history. It destroyed the old London and helped to create the new one. But as bad as all this was, it could have been much worse. You see, the Great Fire happened at the perfect time for London. It came after the plague had killed off 1/5 of the population and had scared away many of the survivors. If it hadn't happened when it did, it's possible that it could have killed even more people and destroyed even more buildings. The fire also happened at a time when England was at war with the Dutch. If the Dutch had invaded while London was in chaos, they might have been able to capture the city. As it was, though, the war was over by the time the fire was put out, and the Dutch never even tried to invade. Finally, the fire happened at a time when England was poor and couldn't afford to rebuild London. If it had happened earlier, when the country was richer, it might not have been so devastating. As it was, though, the fire caused so much damage that it practically bankrupted the country. But it also gave the English people an excuse to rebuild their cities and their country according to new ideas. So, even though it was a terrible disaster, the Great Fire of London was a blessing in disguise. And now, it's time to make a life-changing decision. Will you stay in this crumbling, time-starved world, or will you jump through the portal to save yourself? Okay, I'm kidding. There's no portal. Now it's time for you to get out there and change the world. Hey, thanks for watching. Like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like it. See ya!